I'm from Sub-Saharan Africa, a country most of you already know, and it's called Nigeria. So what do you think when you hear the word Nigeria? Just stop. I know you would have diverse perspectives about this country, but there's one thing I think most of you probably don't know about this country, and it's about the fact that in Nigeria, there are a lot of ants. And so, during my childhood, there was a crisis in the country, and my mother decided to relocate the family back down south, where we are from. And during that period, she wanted to teach us some life lessons. And she chose to teach us this lesson: how to make palm oil from palm nuts. So just imagine me, a 5-year-old, wondering what lesson I wanted to take out of this. And so you can see the process basically involves you boiling the nuts, then you pound the nuts, and then you go through a separation process where you take out the shafts. But the big lesson came the next day. We woke up to this. A huge line of ants had formed a way all from their colony to the pile where we had dumped off the shafts. Why was this fascinating? I watched each one of these ants as they carried each strand of shaft and made their way back to the colony. And we realized that overnight they had moved a quarter of the shafts back to that colony. Why is this interesting? And why was I caught by surprise? It was because I saw one thing in these little creatures. And that is what I'm going to share with you about today. In those ants, I saw Ubuntu. So what is Ubuntu? Ubuntu is from the native Xhosa language in Southern Africa that basically means I am because we are. Ants have colonized almost every landmass on Earth. Their ability to modify their habitats, to tap resources, and to defend themselves has made them a very unique creature. And so I kept wondering, as human beings, as the complex dominant species that we are, why couldn't we be just like the ants? And so I'll be sharing with you today a few things about Ubuntu, some ideals. And the first being that with Ubuntu, less is more. So what do I mean? A famous anthropologist carried out an experiment in Southern Africa among a group of African kids. And so what he did was he gave them a basket of oranges, and he placed that basket under a tree. And he challenged them, saying, the first person to get to that basket will get all the oranges. And then he watched. The kids held their hands together and walked down to that tree and sat down and took their time to share the oranges. And he asked them, why didn't one of you go ahead of the others? But they responded to him saying, Ubuntu. How can I be happy when others are sad? As soon as you have enough money in life to pay for the basics, any extra you get would not make you any much happier. And this is not just my opinion. There's been research studies in the US to show the correlation between high income levels and emotional well-being. And 2 Nobel Prize winners, Angus Deaton and Daniel Kahneman, came up with this conclusion. Emotional well-being rises with log income, but there is no further progress beyond an annual income of $75,000. So just pause and think. Of course, low income does exacerbate the emotional pain associated with misfortunes such as divorce, ill health, and being alone. But they conclude that a high income does buy life satisfaction, but not happiness, and that low income is associated with both low life evaluation and low emotional well-being. And another thing you must know about Ubuntu is that Ubuntu transcends beyond Africa. And I will share with you about the wonderful and fascinating Danish culture. From Malin Ryder's book, Happy as a Dane, she shares to us about the Danish people, and she gives a really interesting story about the Danish farmer who, after farming his produce, he sets up a stand, and setting up the stand, he leaves that stand. And she says that in Denmark, nobody supervises this stand. So each table has a little pot where you leave money for the produce you have bought. And the growers are even considerate. They will leave some little money in the jar. So you need to make change. And then at the end of the day, they will collect their earnings. And that no one even thinks of stealing. But how does this system work? Interestingly, Denmark has been ranked #1 on the World's Happiness Index and #1 on the Forbes World's 10 Best Government lists, which takes into considerations such as criminal justice, absence of corruption, order and security. And the Danish people will tell you that the basic foundations of their society is trust. It takes me to the second point about Ubuntu, which is that Ubuntu is selflessness. And so these numbers on the screen, what comes to mind when you look at it? In 1964, he was the 466th prisoner. And Nelson Mandela walked into Robben Island, where he was going to spend 18 years of the 27 years he was going to be in jail. And when he walked out of Robben Island, after 18 years there, he had only one message to the people of South Africa. And that message was the message of reconciliation. This was a man who was jailed by the apartheid regime of South Africa. But after spending 18 years of his life in Robben Island, came out with just one message. And interestingly, he shares a story about Ubuntu. And he talks about how in the olden days, a country traveler who is making his way through the country could stop at a village without knowing anyone or any ties to that village, and the villagers would welcome him, would provide shelter, would provide food, and the next day he would pick up his bag and continue on his journey. The late Nelson Mandela was an embodiment of Ubuntu. And so how is Ubuntu relevant to us in the society we live in today? And it takes me to my third lesson about Ubuntu, which is more like a call to action. You need to vote for Ubuntu. These three men represent ideals of Ubuntu that we can learn from. Nelson Mandela on selflessness, Ose Muyica on patriotism and selflessness, and my beloved Justin Trudeau, who is same of our generation, but we can learn a lot from. We need to trust leadership with people who believe in serving for the greater good of society. So the latest news about the Panama leaks will give you an insight into the kind of society we live in today and wealth distribution across most countries. But the question I always ask is this: if the same system that gives you wealth you choose to rob, how then do you expect society to improve? We all have a part to play. And Marlene Rideout shares further on this when she says that when a nation's relationship with its politicians and institutions is based on trust, they have a better foundation for living a happy life. And so this may sound very naive or generation-wise, but the truth is that the world could do with a little Ubuntu. And as we evolve in business and in culture, remember that you can always find a way to give back to the same society to which you belong. We are all connected in ways that we do not see and bound in ways that are not visible to the eyes. And so I would end with this, which is a very popular saying in Africa. It is the saying that if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together. Thank you.